Also, he conducted postgraduate research at the University of Wien in Germany, and he offered courses on comparative politics, international relations, Middle East and the East Asia political systems at the University of Utah, Mississippi State University, Michigan State University, and Lake Forest College. His book, Turkish Foreign Policy, Islam, Nationalism and the Globalization, was published by Calgary Macmillan in 2011. Also, he has many articles published in various journals like Inside Turkey, World Affairs, Middle East Politics, Mediterranean Quarter. Now he's going to
Thank you very much. Welcome to Istanbul, welcome to State University. We are very pleased to see you and to host you here. I would like to actually summarize some of the main elements in Turkish foreign policy as a way of introduction, basically to other presentations, and this will be a very short hopefully. I don't know your background actually in terms of coursework in international relations and in Turkey particularly, but I will assume a basic knowledge background in this case. Turkey, and I mean any kind of foreign policy, including Turkish foreign policy, is a function of two contexts, is a function of factors located in two contexts. The first context is the material context, and the second context is the ideational context. So in the material context, we have elements which are geographic, economic, political, population, size of the country, etc. as factors that influence that country's foreign policy. For example, in the United States, the fact that the country is sandwiched by two oceans, so it has shores in two vast oceans, requires the United States a certain kind of foreign policy. I mean, requires the United States to adopt a certain kind of foreign policy, and the fact that it has two soft neighbors also is an important factor in American foreign policy. In contrast, for example, Turkey is not neighbored by soft neighbors. It's neighbored by powerful neighbors, especially when we look at the historical context of this. The first, also historical context including Turkey, Republic of Turkey, and also beyond the Republic of Turkey, the Ottoman Empire, especially the last 100 years of the Ottoman Empire. Turkey was neighbored by two important powerful countries. One of these is Russia and later the Soviet Union, and today we don't have direct neighborhood in that sense, but we have we are neighboring the Russian sphere of influence, okay, in the area. And the other country is Iran. And today Iran is our strongest and most powerful neighbor in that sense, but of course again, the Russian sphere of influence continues. And on the other side, we have a neighborhood, a problematic neighborhood with Greece. So the geography then requires a certain kind of foreign policy, adaptation of certain kind of foreign policy. Basically, for example, let's say in the context of the Cold War, the fact that Turkey was a neighboring country, a NATO member, but neighboring country with the Soviet Union, required Turkey to have good relationship with the West. And we also have this was actually a continuation of the Ottoman foreign policy of balancing against Russia with alliances or alliance formations with European powers. And with the demise of the European powers and the emergence of the United States, so Turkish-American alliance was built upon the foundation of geography and ideological competition. So this wasn't a kind of imposition on Turkey that Turkey had to follow a pro-American foreign policy, but rather the geographic necessities. So if you want to, for example, compare that with Azerbaijan, I think a similar kind of dilemma, neighborhood problems, you know, of Azerbaijan, and the fact that Azerbaijan finds itself in that neighborhood requires a sort of kind of foreign policy for Azerbaijan. I understand and sympathize with that. What are the other factors located in the material context? Another factor is economic. You know, the country does not have solid resources. Resource base of Turkey is quite weak. Energy resources, especially in comparison to Russia, in comparison to Iran, Turkey is a resource-poor country. That requires Turkey to be a trading nation, and you know, maybe a good comparison here will be Japan or South Korea. You know, being poor in resources, you need to export so that you can import those energy resources. And as a trading nation, Turkish foreign policy needs to diversify itself, especially after the Cold War. We see this diversification of Turkish foreign policy in many different areas. Right? So the Arab world is an important, of course, source for Turkey to import those energy resources, as well as to export goods. Europe was always an important source for Turkish export and imports. Okay, so Turkey had to be a trading nation, cannot be isolated from the international economy, cannot be isolated from the international marketplace, if you will. So, in contrast, for example, with Iran. So, if you want to, compare Turkey with Iran, Iran can afford isolation. You know, it is self-sufficient in many aspects. Turkey cannot afford isolation. It's a winter country, another factor, in this. So, two sources, important sources of natural gas. It's a winter country. Basically means you need to, heat households, and the basic heating, resource heating method is natural gas today. In the last 10 years, under the present government, the number of Turkish cities with centralized natural gas distribution has increased from 2 or 3 to 68 today. And so 68 of Turkish cities have centralized natural gas distribution. That means you don't need to buy, as we used to do in our childhood and wait in the queues, these tanks. It comes directly. But it comes at a cost. At a cost not only for households, but at a cost for foreign policy as well, because it's all imports. Imported resource. 68% of Turkish natural gas import come from Russia. About 25% come from Iran. So two of the contenders for regional influence for Turkey also happen to be the source of natural gas. Okay? This, of course, makes countries such as Azerbaijan very important for Turkish strategic calculations in the Nabucco context. I'm sure there will be some talk about that. But there is no alternative to this. So in the case of Syrian crisis that I will be talking later, we have a dilemma here that Turkey needs to exert itself as a strong power in Syrian politics, but at the same time, the other opposing powers are the countries that Turkey needs for its natural gas supply. Okay, so all of these material context and the population boom in Turkey. Turkish population has increased rapidly. In 1920, when the Republic was established, Turkish population in the entire country was only 12 million people. Today we are approaching 80 million number. So these, of course, people, in the absence of solid economic grounds, need jobs. So there is a diversification of Turkish economic sector from being an agriculture-based economy to a heavy industry country, but much of this heavy industry, as you can also notice in the streets, are international investments in Turkey. We don't have a national car brand, for example. All of the cars that you will see in the streets are investments. They are produced in Turkey mostly, but there are investments from Europe, from Japan, etc. So these investments need to come to the country. That means also that isolation is not possible for Turkey. It needs to be an active participant in international economy, a stable political system, etc. But on the other side, all of these material factors require a certain kind of foreign policy. On the other side, we have the ideational background. In the ideational background, we include factors such as identity. What is the identity for Turkey, and what's the role of identity? What is the influence of identity in terms of determining a certain kind of foreign policy orientation? Religion. What is the role of religion in foreign policy? That's actually asked in many places. But of course, religion, if you want to suppress religious identity locally, somebody else may not suppress that religious identity. I'm referring here to the European membership process, that we see religion as being played out against Turkey, that Turkey is of a different religion, and therefore it cannot have full membership in the European Union because of this factor. And the European Union, of course, is an important area for Turkish foreign policy, economically and politically. But if the membership is not possible in that direction, I think Muzaffer is going to talk about that. So what are other avenues for diversification? You can think historical memory as an important factor. Maybe Russia may not look at Turkey with a hostile attitude, but in the historical consciousness of Turkish foreign policymakers, there is always a threat from Russia. Iran is also like that. Turkey is a secular country, does not play the role in the sectarian politics, especially in the polarization in the world today, in our neighborhood, between the Sunni and Shia camps. What is the position of Turkey? But again, this is being, this is being an issue independent of Turkey. That the neighborhood politics is being polarized in these terms. So all of these, as a combination of this material context and the ideational context, at the juncture of these, we have the Turkish foreign policy, and any country in that sense is similar, influenced by these factors. Traditionally, Turkey was a pro-Western and basically a pro-American country, and the foreign policy of Turkey was in that direction. But as I said, the neighborhood and membership process is being increasingly getting more blurred, blurry, and therefore we need to diversify Turkish foreign policy in different areas. But also, globally speaking, the global power center of the world, let's say, is shifting from the West to Asia, and we see this, right? So, 1/3 of the entire world population live in two countries, in just two countries. Okay? That's the 1/3 of the entire world population, China and India together. China will be #1 economy in the world, followed by the United States, but followed by India rather than Europe. Okay? So we have this shift to, if you will, this Pacific Asia, that will include the United States, but the United States of that time, let's say, if you want to project this for the next perhaps 30 years, in the next 30 years of the United States will be a much different country from now. And today the United States happens to have a president who won elections without the majority white vote base. So this is what I'm saying, an increasing diversification of US population. Okay? Perhaps Latinization of the United States, Spanish United States basically. is becoming a reality of, for Turkey to consider, and that also means Turkish foreign, another area for Turkish foreign policy is Latin America, okay, so Brazil. Brazil emerged as a basic partner for Turkey in many of occasions, including Iran nuclear deal. Africa is another area for Turkey to seek influence and to diversify its interests. Okay, so Middle East, especially after Arab Spring, is becoming a zone of opportunity for Turkey. But East Asia as well. Okay, so all of these global power dilemmas, global power realities, compel Turkey to diversify its foreign policy, to diversify its interests, and come up with an approach that would fit the post-Cold War era better. Okay, so, and I will actually end here, and then with further, more detailed discussions in many of these areas of opportunities, we will have a good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for your valuable introduction and points. Now we are going to talk about the relations Turkey with neighboring countries, neighboring regions, and let's start talk from the east. Dr. Çağdaş Üngör from Marmara University will talk about the Turkish foreign policy toward China. She graduated from Middle East Technical University. Then she studied in Bilgi University in Turkey Cultural Studies program, and she wrote a master thesis about the impact of Mao in Turkey. Also, she obtained her PhD degree from New York University, State University, from History Department. Her PhD thesis was about the Chinese communist propaganda abroad. And the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, let me start by thanking Şehir University and people who invited me here. Well, you mentioned China as within the neighborhood. Well, it's increasingly getting to become so. Although I will start by the Cold War and with basically with 1950s up until I will try to make a historical overview of Sino-Turkish relations, because there were landmark changes ever since 1950s, and most of these changes happened, landmark changes happened in the 21st century. But well, let me start with some of the preconceptions or perceptions of China in Turkey, which I believe to be apparent among the statesmen, diplomats, as well as average people on the street in Turkey. And I believe this conception, the most important conception of this sort, is the idea of distance. The conception of distance, that China, this is not only a geographical conception, although it's obvious that China and Turkey is placed on the opposite ends of Asia, so they are indeed very far from one another. But, well, besides this geographical conception, there is this cultural distance. I mean, more important than the geographical distance. Why am I saying that geographical distance is not very important? Because, well, New York is as far from Istanbul as, Beijing. Beijing and New York is more or less, equally far from Istanbul, but we never define New York or the United States as a distant country, and we are still in most of these seminars and academic sessions and basically everywhere, on TV, we are still using this conception of Far East, and we are still using China to define the area where China is placed as the Far East, which is basically obsolete in the United States or in most Western countries. most of these, most of the scholars and journalists, etc., they are using the term East Asia, which is, I believe, is a more neutral category. So this distance is not about geography; it's about culture. And during the Cold War, it also became more about ideology. So by the 1950s, of course, People's Republic of China was established in 1949, and well, Turkey did not recognize China until 1971. And when you look at the 1950s, you see that this ideological distance has been really pronounced. I mean, this is a very important part of Sino-Turkish relations, although state-level relations was non-existent. I mean, they all started in 1971, and even in 1971, it was just a political gesture because Sino-US rapprochement took place in the early 1970s. Nixon's visit to China and everything. Well, Kissinger's, Kissinger was the architect behind this ping-pong diplomacy and Sino-US rapprochement. The basic idea was to counter the Soviet threat. And basically, Turkey followed suit. So we didn't, even at that time, even in 1971, our Prime Minister, well, basically contested the idea that, what are we doing recognizing China? What good comes out of it, etc. So this was just a political gesture that we did because we have been following the US lead in foreign policy since the 1950s during the Democratic Party governments in Turkey. In that decade of 1950s. And, well, what kind of contact did we have with China? Well, Korean War. We basically were on the battlefield. I mean, Turkish soldiers and Chinese soldiers basically engaged in conflict in the Korean War. This was also something that Turkey did because, of course, the Democratic Party was very much an anti-communist government. They sincerely believed in the idea of containing China, North Korea, and whatever communist countries you had in the neighborhood, in Asia, in Africa, etc. But also, well, it enabled us to join NATO in 1952, and we have this NATO membership, of course, solidified Turkey's geopolitical position during the Cold War, and it has remained so. Although Turkey had many differences with the U.S. Starting in the late 1960s, and especially with the Cyprus conflict. Well, we have remained in NATO, and Turkey, up until the end of the Cold War, was a very much pro-U.S., pro-Western country. Well, there are some important events, although I highly doubt that they were landmark changes. Well, Mao Zedong thought, or Maoism became popular in Turkey during the 1960s among certain left-wing groups. So we can say that, well, although despite the lack of state-level exchanges, Turkish and Chinese people, I mean, they were getting to know, I mean, at least the Turkish people were learning about China, mostly through mass media, which was highly, prejudicial or used a very, pronounced anti-communist discourse, but also they were learning it from alternative sources. And Radio Peking started broadcasting to Turkey in 1957 and continued until today. So we believe that some people were hearing about China through their direct broadcasts. But mostly, even after the recognition of China in 1971, nothing happened. 1970s are mostly lost years in terms of Chinese-Turkish relations, in terms of state-level exchanges or other types of economic exchanges, etc. So nothing much happened up until the 1980s. Well, what happened in the 1980s? Well, although China and Turkey, of course, had totally different regimes and they were coming from totally different cultural and ideological backgrounds, well, we see that similar changes have happened in Turkey and China. Well, Turgut Özal government here and Deng Xiaoping government there. Privatization became important. Export-oriented growth became important. We can safely say that both Turkey and China went through enormous changes during this period. Although Turkey has been a capitalist country, I mean, average people, public at large, did not really experience those changes up until the 1980s. There were so many drastic changes in this period, and this export-oriented growth and basically trade becoming so much more important in both Turkey and China. We see that there is a shift of emphasis towards economic relations with China, and we see the first significant state-level visits, and President Emre's visit to China, I believe in 1982, and Turkey also visited China, and there were exchanges. I mean, Chinese officials, high-level officials, also started to visit Turkey during this time. And when we come to the 1990s, we see, mostly because of the Chinese opening up reforms, they paid off in China, and China increasingly became a major trading country during the 1990s, and Turkish-Chinese relations basically ever since the 1990s have been increasingly focused on, the economic dynamics became so much important in terms of shaping the rest of the relationship. State-level exchanges basically were motivated, even today, they are basically motivated by private sector initiatives, because we are consuming so many Chinese products, because we are buying so much from China. And I don't believe this to be a product of a systematic foreign policy on the part of China, even today. Even after the landmark changes, paradigmatic shift in Turkish foreign policy, I don't believe that we are doing enough in order to turn this wave, towards ourselves to our benefit. And I'll come to that later. But in the 1990s, basically, economic relations, trade, bilateral trade picks up, and there's one, of course, in the political sense, there's a drawback in Chinese-Turkish relations, which became much more important during the 1990s. The Uyghur people, the Muslim Turkic people living in the autonomous Xinjiang province, they, ever since the 1950s, they have been immigrating to Turkey because of the, several kinds of, discrimination or repressions they were suffering in China. Well, they have been here. They have been coming here ever since the 1950s. But in the 1990s, you see this, separatist movement in the Xinjiang province going a little bit violent, and where there are certain organizations built, and there are some violent skirmishes in China during this period. So China is growing increasingly anxious about the Turkish support for these groups, public support as well as state-level officials. Some of you may know that high-level people, high-level officials in Turkey were having conversations with these diaspora leaders. Members of the Turkic diaspora in Turkey, those who advocated all these radical sentiments about China, the separatist agenda, etc. Up until the late 1990s, they were getting official recognition from the Turkish leaders. What we did, how economic relations changed this by the end of the 1990s is that, Turkish side had to be much more attentive to Chinese demands in this area, and ever since the 1990s, we have been denouncing that Turkey officially supports any of these groups, any of the separatist agenda or pro-independence movements in the Xinjiang province. But although this problem, of course, lingers even until today. The most recent crisis we had was in 2009, and our Prime Minister basically defined whatever was happening in China as an almost genocide or something like a genocide. So, it got tense all of a sudden, although in 2010, again, the bilateral relations picked up. But I believe, even though it's going nice right now, this lingers, this remains as a fundamental problem area between Turkey and China, and it is because the public opinion in this sense is basically determined or very much influenced by the Uyghur diaspora in Turkey. And we don't have so many China experts, and we don't have people speaking Chinese, traveling to Chinese. We have, of course, businessmen, but we don't have so many scholars. We don't have so many journalists. We don't have people residing in China to go and observe these events. So we're either getting everything from Western news sources, or you know, in this huge gray area that, you know, Turkish statesmen or Turkish people at large are, you know, not able to grasp whatever is going on in China. Well, the Uyghur diaspora takes the lead, and then they're on TV and they're telling us whatever is happening in China. And obviously, they have a rather biased opinion. I'm not saying that there's no human rights issues in Xinjiang province, but the ideas that we're hearing on TV, in a sense, is quite biased and radical. So this problem lingers on, but the fundamental landmark change that happened in Chinese-Turkish relations, some numbers may provide an example. In 2000, Turkey and China had $1 billion of bilateral trade volume. And today, as of today, we have $24 billion of US dollars of trade volume. So this is a very, of course, this is not a gradual change, this is a landmark event, I believe. And the main problem here, I mean, this is mostly when we're talking about Turkish foreign policy regarding East Asia, and we're talking about Turkish foreign policy towards China, we are basically, I mean, most of these optimistic scholars pick on, for instance, the increasing level of state exchanges, state-level exchanges, and also the growing bilateral trade volume. But the fact is that we are basically selling 1 to China, and we are buying 9. So it's 9 times, and they are selling us more, like 9 times more than we sell them. And this did not change against government policy. Ever since the late 1990s, Turkish governments have been fighting this, you know, trade deficit, but they were not able to, you know, counter it. We took some precautions in the mid, you know, in 2004 and 2005. That was the Istanbul Declaration, together with, you know, American merchants and, you know, from several other developing countries. We have instituted certain quotas, certain restrictions on Chinese products, but the overall trend was irreversible. Some of it is because of global changes, of course. I mean, China is basically, in almost every country you have a trade deficit vis-a-vis China. But some of it, I believe, is very much determined by the fact that Chinese businessmen still see China as a distant land. And because we have this linguistic deficiency, because we have certain cultural biases, ideological biases, whatever, basically they are not able to, they have not been able to change anything or boost the trade relations on Turkey's behalf. I mean, change, reverse the, not reverse it, but maybe, well, 1 to 9 is a rather big gap, so you need to do something about it. So basically, do I have time? Okay. So basically, there is this landmark. I mean, the increased state-level exchanges, of course, they were during the Justice and Development government. We have seen increased contact with China, state-level exchanges, high-level visits. I can give many examples from Abdullah Gül's visit in 2009 to, well, Tayyip Erdogan's most recent visits in 2012, but also the Chinese side are also, you know, paying much more attention to Turkey in this sense. So lots of treaties have been signed, and the most important perhaps is the Strategic Partnership Treaty, which is signed in 2010, and this aims to bring Chinese-Turkish relations to a level where, you know, political and cultural exchanges will be as much important as, you know, economic relations, because economic ties, they're already growing, and, well, although Turkey is on the losing side in that, well, Chinese products are also, let me emphasize this because this is not a totally negative picture. Chinese products are making poorer people much more, you know, comfortable in terms of it increases their consumption level, and it basically has a positive influence on the inflation, overall inflation figures. So it's not all bad, but anyway, private sector is also already doing this. And what can the governments do? Well, they sign bilateral agreements, and they make so many deals on the energy sector, well, nuclear energy, but also wind power, green energy technologies. Other than that, well, Turkish side has been very much attentive to the Chinese tourists, these Chinese middle income or middle class people. Turkish presidents have been inviting Chinese tourists, encouraging Chinese tourists to visit Turkey, and there's been some progress in that. The latest numbers, I think, is that 90,000 Chinese people, tourists, have visited Turkey most recently. What else? Well, political sense, of course, there's always talk about, making a political deal with China, politically strategic, some kind of cooperation with China. I think this is problematic. I mean, this is, of course, Chinese side and Turkish side have been emphasizing this, but the most recent, there are so many forms in Chinese-Turkish relations. I mean, well, Turkey, yes, we have a much more multi-dimensional policy. Yes, there has been a paradigmatic change, but we're still a NATO member. I mean, Turkey is still a NATO member, and, well, China is leading this Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is totally anti-NATO. You might disagree on this. They are not very influential, but geopolitically speaking, well, China is not very much. They have not been so much. They have never encouraged any NATO action, or they have been totally uncomfortable with what the United States is doing in Asia Pacific region, including Central Asian states, etc. So the Arab Spring, what Turkey says on Syria and what Chinese side says on Syria, including the recent veto, I mean, in terms of taking more of an action, and Turkey was supporting this UN deal, and China, of course, opposed this. And this is only an example. I'm just mentioning this because this is the most recent example. But such and such, I mean, this all looks good on paper, the strategic partnership, political cooperation, etc. But when it comes to concrete things, something important, something regionally or globally significant, well, China and Turkey falls apart. So my understanding of Chinese-Turkish relations is that, well, the private sector will lead this initiative. Of course, we will buy more from China, maybe sell more to China, but politically, I don't think much of a progress will come out of, from East Asia as compared to, for instance, Japan and South Korea, which have been, allies to Turkey or, partners to Turkey ever since the Cold War. So I'll end up here. If you have any questions, I will continue with those.
Thank you for your speech. Actually, after all speech, we will have time for questions. Now, let's turn to Russia, the Russian-Turkish relations. We have a speaker from Marmara University, Emre Erşen. He graduated from Marmara University, Political Science and International Relations Department. He wrote his thesis on Russian Eurasianism and its impact on Turkish-Russian relations in the post-Cold War period. And he has published extensively on this issue and presented several papers in conferences in Turkey and abroad. His forthcoming article titled "The Evolution of Eurasia as a Geopolitical Concept in Post-Cold War Turkey" is going to be published in the Journal of Geopolitics. After your speech, we will have 5 minutes break.
Thank you, and thank the organizers once again for giving us the opportunity to share our ideas and our vision about Turkish foreign policy today. I also have a PowerPoint presentation, but I'm not sure if you will be able to see that. Muzaffer, you can please click on it to see if it's possible. To make things a bit more visual for you and to have you, maybe it might be easier for you to follow what I'm going to say today. Well, because my focus today will be on the post-Cold War period mainly, and I want to give an insight about Turkey's relations with Russia, especially in the post-Cold War period. But unlike China, of course, Russia is Turkey's neighbor. And I don't mean the common land borders. We don't have any common land borders with Russia. But if you take a look at the Caucasus, where we have land borders with Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia, you see that there Russia is a very important player. But apart from that, also historically, we see that Russia has always been a very important neighboring country for Turkey for various reasons. Well, first of all, we have more than 500 years of diplomatic relations with Russia, and that diplomacy most of the time includes enmity and rivalry rather than cooperation and friendship, unfortunately. And we see that the two empires, the Ottoman Empire and the Russian Empire, have fought many wars between 17th and 19th centuries. And we can call Russia, in that sense, the major nemesis of the Ottoman Empire, because that was the case when we take a look at the 19th century especially. Well, the First World War, of course, changed a lot of things, and during the interwar period, we see that Turkey and the Soviet Union enjoyed close relations with each other, and they were both opposed to the West, in a sense. Turkey was going through a national movement, national independence movement, whereas Russia at the time was leading the communist system. Therefore, it was a good time for Turkish-Russian relations, but all of a sudden it ended with the eruption of the Second World War, and we see that Stalin started to make requests, territorial requests from Turkey, and that was the end of the cooperation period. And during the Cold War, we see that the two countries didn't really have much of a contact with each other due to the fact that they were included in opposite ideological camps. Turkey was in the Western bloc, it entered NATO in 1952, and Russia was, of course, the leading member of the Soviet bloc, as we would suggest. So the end of the Cold War, in this sense, changed a lot of things for Russia, both in the positive and negative ways. And during the 1990s, unfortunately, there was this notion of geopolitical rivalry between the two countries, mainly over the South Caucasus, Black Sea, Central Asia. Wherever we take a look at the former Soviet space, we see that the two countries have been actually regarded as geopolitical rivals. So today, my focus will be on the 2000s actually, and we'll be seeing there already past there. So okay, so there we'll be taking a look at the Turkish-Russian relations in the 1990s in a minute. But like I said, in the 2000s, the relations between the two countries have continuously improved, not only in terms of cooperation in areas such as trade and energy, which might be regarded as a bit more technical, but also regarding their dialogue in major regional and global political issues. And the improvement of relations between the two countries was so remarkable in the 2000s that some people in Turkey and Russia have started to name it as the formation of a new strategic axis in Eurasia. Well, I think the term strategic today can be a little too ambitious for labeling the Turkish-Russian relations, but we can still claim that the positive course in Turkish-Russian relations throughout the 2000s especially gradually replaced the geopolitical rivalry of the 1990s that you see in the slide. And that notion, of course, portrayed the two countries as chief competitors for political and economic influence over the South Caucasus and Central Asia. So in this presentation, I will try to reveal and analyze the major factors behind this positive change in Turkish-Russian relations in the 2000s. And my main argument here is that the rapprochement between Turkey and Russia can best be analyzed with respect to developments in three spheres: bilateral, regional, and global. But since we're talking about a positive change, I think we first need to have an overview of Turkish-Russian relations in the 1990s in order to understand what has changed in the 2000s. Well, regarding the 1990s, we can easily say that Turkish-Russian relations during this period tried to overcome particularly one major dilemma, and that was, of course, reconciling geopolitical competition with economic cooperation. On the one hand, Ankara and Moscow viewed each other as serious rivals in the so-called New Great Game for political and economic influence over the former Soviet republics. On the other hand, they also anticipated the importance of their economic ties, which have especially become much stronger after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And this dilemma seems to have shaped the course of Turkish-Russian relations, particularly in the 1993-1997 period, when a number of problems have frequently caused political crisis between the two countries, despite the maintenance of impressive figures in trade and other economic spheres. As you can also see here, most of the problems that emerged between Turkey and Russia in the 1990s were related with their competition for sphere of influence in the South Caucasus, Central Asia, the Caspian, and Black Sea regions. On the other hand, we see an opposite trend in the economic sphere, fostering stronger cooperation between the two countries. And you can easily see this trend in the figures in bilateral trade and tourism especially. In 1997, the initiation of the Blue Stream natural gas pipeline has also added a strong energy dimension to the picture. And if it has not been for these economic links, I believe Turkish-Russian relations could have faced more serious flaws due to political issues, but the economic dimension of the relations forced both countries to keep their geopolitical competition at least on a manageable level. And this became increasingly evident after 1999 when Vladimir Putin came into power in Russia. And during Putin's leadership, Turkish-Russian relations started to enjoy their best times ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union. And in November 2001, the relations between the two countries was even elevated to the level of multi-dimensional partnership. The emergence of such an optimistic period in Turkish-Russian relations was of course based on pragmatism, and during this period the two countries seem to have pushed aside the problematic political issues and preferred to proceed with increasing cooperation in issues such as energy, trade, and other technical matters. And this can also be seen in the agenda of the high-level visits which took place between Turkey and Russia in the beginning of 2000s. Well, although it is true that economic issues dominated the agenda of the Turkish-Russian relations, we should not also overlook the two countries' search for a new dialogue in their policies towards the South Caucasus and Central Asia either. And I believe it is this search that distinguishes the 2000s from 1990s. This was symbolized by new regional cooperation projects such as the Caucasus Stability Pact, Moscow-Ankara Central Asia Strategic Triangle, and Black Sea 4. And most importantly, of course, the Action Plan for Cooperation in Eurasia, which institutionalized the regional political cooperation between Turkey and Russia in the post-September 11 period. The regional dimension of the Turkish-Russian relations was not only limited with the former Soviet space. The course of Turkey's relations with the European Union has especially been influential in pushing